Welcome to the Level Up Artist Podcast. We're your hosts, Adriana M.A. and
Jackie Sanders. We're two art professionals sharing forth the advice and business lessons we have learned along our creative journeys.
We talk to artists, leaders, and art professionals to demystify the creative process and discover new ways to succeed as a career-minded artist.
If you find value in these conversations, please go ahead and subscribe. This will help other creatives like you find our podcast, and you'll be notified when we drop a new episode every Tuesday.
So on today's episode, we have a topic to kind of delve into a little bit of what goes on in our heads. Specifically, we're focusing on cognitive distortions, which, if you haven't heard of them, it's a type of thinking pattern that emphasizes negative biases and distorts reality. This can happen to anyone. It sounds really scary, but it's definitely important to keep an eye out for them, or they can definitely have a serious impact on your mindset and even affect your art business. So we're going to dive straight in. And the first one that we want to talk about is the all or nothing thinking. This has happened to everybody at some point, right? Like, especially if there was something you were pining towards and then didn't happen. It's that, oh no, it's over kind of thinking, right? It's a common one for artists to grapple with. It often manifests itself as a tendency to see situations in extremes, kind of like a black and white. There's no gray. It's either perfection or failure. It's one of those, like, I didn't get, what was the point of that? I don't know. I think we've all had that, especially if you've had a gap where you didn't paint or do your art for a little bit. You've all had that thought. I'm sure you have, confess, where you're just like, no, I don't have it in me anymore. Like, it's gone. Like, I didn't keep up with it, so it's gone. And it's
Gone forever. Yeah.
Yeah. Like, what?
That is definitely a relatable feeling. And that's why I'm excited we're doing this episode today, because we're going to go ahead and identify, especially as creatives, some of the most common cognitive distortions, but then also talk about solutions. So if you find that any of these are relatable, don't worry. We're not just going to like empty the junk drawer and then leave it a mess. So we're about also some solutions for it too.
Absolutely.
Because especially as artists, like in the art world, the creative processes are often inherently like messy. We're making multiple iterations of creative ideas and experimenting. So expecting perfection the first time we do something, or even the 50th time we're doing something, is pretty pointless, because perfection is subjective in the art world, right? Like, you can think that you nailed a piece of art and someone else will still have a criticism of it, or vice versa. You think a painting is like terrible and someone's like, I need to have this painting. I love it. I have this emotional connection with it. And you're like, this one, really? Like, of all the ones, this is okay, great, sure. So it's the type of distortion that can often lead to burnout, those unrealistic expectations of ourselves, and self-imposed limitations, because you're constantly in your own head, almost having that overview of yourself from a critical standpoint of, you need to do everything 0 to 100 or nothing, especially with this all or nothing mindset. That can be very, very exhausting at times. And again, often lead to burnout, which doesn't do anyone any good.
No, and then if you do burn out, then it takes longer to recover. So it's a vicious cycle. But again, that's why we're sharing it, because it is a common one that pops up. Like, I remember a time when I used to have my paintings hidden in a closet. No joke. Like, this is literally what I would do. I would finish a painting and stick it in a closet. It was one of those things at the time where I was like, if it had even one flaw, and it could be like the most ridiculous minor thing ever. I don't know. Like, it has a cat hair in the paint, but nobody's ever going to see anyways. Like, who cares, right? But it was like, game over. Like, that's it. It's unacceptable. Like, into the closet you go. And I wouldn't even show it, not even in my own house. Like, it's absolutely ridiculous. So this is one of those mindsets that took me a lot of years to help identify. And as it relates to the hiding the paintings, it eventually dawned on me that I was holding myself to some kind of impossible standard, especially with the skill level that I had at the time. Like, if it's not oh so perfect, it's kind of like that skill gap of what I think it should look like. But if I don't have the skills and techniques to get it to what I think it should look like, then I have to be realistic about what kind of output I can create. I can't just be like, oh, it needs to look like this Renaissance master painting, but I've only been painting 2 years. Like, seriously, like, come on. Like, you need to adjust some of these things. And I had been painting all my life, but still, it just felt like, I don't know, like it's not there, so I'm not going to show it. And what's funny about things like this, when you go through these, is like the moment I showed some of my coworkers, I eventually showed them some of these paintings. They're like, "Oh my God, this is fantastic! I can only do a stick figure. Like, oh my, like this is great." And I'm like, "See, all that negative baggage of like, no, it is terrible. Like nobody can see it, and everything else suddenly just kind of crumbles away. Like it's just, yeah, all or
Yeah.
nothing. It's not gonna serve you. It's not gonna
I
serve
think
you."
that's definitely where the double-edged sword of being a creative can get, because both with our creative visions that we bring to life for the world can be great, but also these creative scenarios in our head that don't even exist yet or are not things that people are thinking. We can kind of do a creative spiral in that way too, which I feel like another very common one is that fortune telling mindset or trying to predict what's going to happen, the artist crystal ball in a way, to say like, oh, they'll definitely reject this submission, so why should I even bother applying? Like, I'm not going to get accepted, so what's the point? Or this client or collector, they're not going to like this piece, and so what's the point of even presenting it to them? And so this type of thought distortion often attempts to predict the future outcome or assume what others are thinking, typically in a negative light, before you have any proof or any data on that being the case. Like, people may have said nothing bad about it, nothing bad about you or your work, but you're like, oh, well, I know they're just not going to like it. So like, what's the point? When you haven't even given them a chance to say if that's true or not, which can
I
be so
know.
tough.
I know. And the sad thing is like, how's that saying go? Thoughts are not facts. But the thing is like if
Oh,
you don't
yeah.
tell the brain the difference between the two, which is what we're talking about, recognizing them, acknowledging that these things pop up, you end up believing these so-called predictions. And then it can lead to self-doubt, anxiety, a lack of confidence in the art, even missed opportunities, especially like you said, if you're going with what's the point and then you don't even apply. Like you
Right.
why wouldn't yeah, and why would you even convince yourself, of some of these things, and think of like, if I don't, like if I do blank, it's pointless, whatever, fill in the blank with whatever you want, because there's no way to say yes, except if you don't even apply to the thing, how would you even know? I don't know.
Right.
I feel like this one versus some of the other types of thinking is a little bit easier to kind of defeat when it pops up. At least the way I like to approach it is like, if this kind of thought pops up, I just try to ask myself, are you 100% sure? And do you have any solid facts to back it up? So it's like,
Yeah.
okay, so there's this exhibition that you want to apply to, this group show. Let's use that as an example. There's a group show you want to apply to, and normally there are some artists that you hold in high regard that get in, and you don't feel like, from a skill level standpoint, that you're anywhere near them. And again, this is all very subjective, but let's say this is how you're feeling against it, or about it. If you don't apply, like it's not your call to make. Let's start right
Yeah.
there. It's outside of you making the best application you can. That decision is actually not in your control. There's a group of jurors usually, that will review the entries, and they make the decision. And usually you don't even know. Sometimes you don't even know who the jury is. So why would you try to predict what somebody you don't even know would think about something they haven't seen? See where I'm
Right.
going with this? So that's where it's like, why would they say no? They haven't even seen it. So yeah, if
Yeah.
this one pops up, just try to stick to the facts. Yeah.
Yeah, and that I feel like it takes me right back to growing up, like as an athlete, to where I feel very fortunate. I think I was like eighth grade trying out for the high school team, which I've been playing like year-round basketball for years, like went to nationals. Like, there's, in hindsight, I'm like, yeah, you're probably going to make the JV high school team. But mentally, I was truly like, I'm not going to make it. Like, I'm not good enough. All these like doubts. And I feel very thankful because, very similarly, my mom basically did this with me. She said, okay, Jackie, you have two options. Option one, you don't try out. and you're not going to make the team. There's 100% chance you're not going to make it if you don't try out. She's like, option two, you do try out. There's still a chance you might not make it, but at least there's a chance that you will. So you get a pick. Do you pick 100% you're not going to make it, or a slight chance you might not make it? And like, it sounds so simple, but like in my brain, and maybe for listeners out there, seeing things in that very like black and white. Okay, what are my options? Apply, don't apply. Like put your name in the hat or leave it out. Like in order to make those opportunities happen for yourself, your name at least needs to be out there. It needs to be in the application pool for the show. So like, yeah, you might not get in, but it was that lesson of like, don't make someone else's decision for them. That oftentimes with this mindset we can really do. So yeah.
I know. I love that. I'm like, my mom used to do something similar. And one of her other pieces of advice that ties into this one, she would be like, what's the worst they can say? Two letters, an N and a no.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But they could say yes. So, just
well.
yeah. One of those like hope for the best, prepare for the worst. And it's like, just look at the facts, Now, if you're trying to apply to, I don't know, Miami Basketball or something like that, some big type show, and you're nowhere near it. I mean, why not still throw your shot, right? If you want to. But yeah, no, just get educated on it, and like learn what does it take to get to that level and then go from there and then actually shoot your shot, so to speak.
Right. Which I do think there is a slight caveat for this example that we're saying in terms of applications, because oftentimes there's a financial fee for the application. Yep. So that's where the educating your mindset comes in. But it's almost like, I feel like with applying for colleges, a mindset that people talk to me a lot about. You have your quote unquote safe schools, and then you have, okay, a little bit of a reach, and then the like Hail Mary, F it, let's try for that one. Because again, put your name in the hat. So it's similar with art applications too, which is a slight caveat, but applicable for this. Like you still want to keep the odds in your favor, because that helps with the confidence and momentum, but also thinking of opportunities or things that you go for in that way of like safe, what feel like safe opportunities, a little bit of a push, putting you way out of your comfort zone, and maybe a few Hail Marys here and there, and then see what happens.
And with all three of them, don't try to predict. Like, it's just not worth it. Don't preoccupy yourself. Preoccupy. It's just not worth it. Another one that pops up a lot, and I'm sure you've all heard this one, is shoulda, coulda, woulda. AK artistic regrets, so to speak. So this is like, you did the thing, right? In our little example, you did the thing, you applied and everything else. And then you start dwelling on past decisions or even thinking of alternative scenarios in your head. Or I could have done this. I should have done that. I would have approached it this way. And it's like, it's in the past. Like, yeah. Don't get stuck on that. Don't get stuck on that.
Yeah, because playing that whole like what if game can really mess with your head, honestly. Yes. And in an art career, it can be especially paralyzing because you start thinking like, oh, I should have taken that opportunity, or I should have done this better. And using that rejection to an exhibition application as an example, yes, it's important to be realistic and to set that as an objective if possible, but there's no use holding to like, oh, well, like what could have been if you got in, or what could have been, let's say if you missed an application because you either didn't prioritize the time or you didn't know about it till after it was due, and like kicking yourself for not doing it, being like, well, that would have been my big break if I had just done that. Like, why did I miss it? Like, no, just accept where you are in that moment and free yourself from all those shoulda, coulda, wouldas. Because that's really where that toxic negative energy comes in, and it's not helpful to anyone.
Yeah. And you're better served by noticing if there are any areas of improvement that then you can apply to future applications or future situations. It could be a learning opportunity. Maybe that no came through because you weren't ready for it yet, and that's okay. But trying to say if I could get on a time machine to change my answers, like that's not going to help anybody. Like, that technology is not out there that we're aware of, so don't even try. And of course, this can apply to all kinds of situations. Like maybe there was a trip that didn't take place or a client proposal that didn't go the way that you expected it. Just try to identify like the situation and look at it as objectively as possible and figure out the parts that you have no control over, let it go. It was a jury that made the decision, or maybe it was just a matter of timing and you didn't see the application opening in time. Like that's okay. Um, all you can really do is focus on what you can for the next time. Using that exhibition or open call example, maybe put it in your Google Calendar and make it due to yourself at least a week before the actual due date. So you have time to work on it, not rush it, and the thing doesn't close up on you before you're ready, like things like that. But there's a lot more cognitive distortions that happen to especially to artists. We've highlighted the three most common, and there's a ton more out there. But if you want to read up more on it, do check out the episode notes. We're actually going to be linking up an article from Harvard Medical School that has about a dozen of them. Now, again, this happens to everybody. So we've given examples of the art life applications, but even with those other ones, you'll see. I'm sure you're going to identify some of those. But next up, we're going to be discussing some tools and techniques to help you overcome some of these cognitive distortions and cultivate some resilience. But first, let's put in a quick word from our sponsors.
This episode is brought to you by the Level Up Artists business community. This ever-evolving membership values community over competition and growing connections with fellow creatives who share the same goals and challenges as you.
Life as a modern artist can be both exciting and overwhelming. Art school or self-taught, emerging or seasoned professional, there's a lot of information out there, but what do working artists actually need?
Other industries have continuing education programs for their professionals to sharpen up their skills and stay up to date with the systems, technology, and tools needed to succeed. And we believe that artists should too.
We've spent countless hours of trial and error weeding through tons of information to find the gold and creating sustainable systems that actually work so you don't have to waste your time going down endless rabbit holes.
We are passionate about exchanging ideas and sharing resources with fellow career-minded artists about the business side of art. From artist documents and exhibition prep to templates and tools to help you work faster and smarter, our course modules cover everything from social media to technology and sustainable studio practices too.
Ready to get started? Head on over to levelupartisthub.com to learn more, get immediate access, and level up your creative career today. Welcome back, everybody. So let's dive into some tools and techniques that can help you overcome some of these cognitive distortions. And with that, I will say self-awareness and self-compassion are going to go a very long way when it comes to this. Like, just don't beat yourself up over these. Like, again, it happens. So one of the things that I found the most helpful is to have a mindfulness practice, or at least attempt to cultivate one. As an artist with ADHD, this is very hard for me to do because my mind is always going 500 miles per hour. But I have found it very, very helpful to at least attempt to have a mindfulness practice with things like meditation, deep breathing, staying present, trying to reduce anxiety. As it relates to my practice, it's hard for me to just sit there and try to meditate and do just that. So for me, for example, one way in which I apply it is actually while I'm painting. So I try to do more mindful painting where I'm focusing on the brush strokes, I'm focusing on the colors that I'm mixing at the moment. Um, I'm trying to enjoy the way the brush glides as I try to make a hard edge, which is very satisfying. But during those moments, I'm trying to focus less or worry about the final outcome and just focus on what's the next thing I'm doing on this canvas or on this mural or on this sculpture. Like, what's the next thing? And what does it look like and what does it feel like, and try to shut everything else out, the laundry list of all the stuff that needs to get done, as well as the pressure of what I think this thing should become.
Yeah. And one thing that I found kind of similarly is having time intentionally to journal. This could be both before or during my creative practice. So I love journaling just from a documenting like where your mind is. The Artist's Way is a great book. If you're interested in doing a standard like journaling practice where they talk about morning pages, where rather than journaling, I did this today and then I did this, and like documenting your life, it's more of just like stream of consciousness journaling, which I have found super helpful, because oftentimes, especially if I start journaling, you may not know why you're feeling a specific emotion or why you feel maybe a heaviness in your body, but just document whatever your thoughts are. They don't even have to be complete sentences, just as they come and go, stream of conscious journal. And that happens sometimes when I'm painting too, always having a notebook out next to in my creative space. Because then as those emotions arise, when you're starting a new project, you can document them. And honestly, sometimes that's helpful in terms of gaining the title of your painting, or it may inform your future artist statement of what is this abstract series about, when you can look back at, okay, what were the emotions that arose? What are the moments that I'm reflecting on while I'm painting? Because inevitably they do affect each other. So having a journaling practice, whether while you're painting, while you're creating art, or just in your day-to-day life, can be super helpful with recording those thoughts, those feelings, and may even spark some creative ideas. They can also be positive ideas or positive emotions too, not always negative. Which also comes to another great thing, which may sound a little cheesy, may sound a little woo-woo sometimes, but just having positive affirmations for yourself, that positive self-talk can really help counter those negative thoughts. So like, for example, if an artist is struggling with self-doubt, they may reiterate to themselves, like, my unique perspective is a valuable asset in my art practice, which again may sound a little woo-woo or may feel weird at first, but having those reminders of kind of like checking yourself mentally and saying, okay, is this really how I feel or want to be feeling? And also imagining, what if someone was saying that externally to you, and is a huge element to it.
Yeah, and I do want to give like the corporate side of things real quick to that last one of positive affirmations. Like if you're like, this sounds a little too abstract for me, you can think of it this way. Like if you've ever seen sales team go together, they cheerlead each other on essentially. Like, we got this client is ours, like, oh, we're gonna go in there, we're gonna crush it, like
Right.
that kind of energy. That's a positive affirmation too, if you think
Yeah.
about it. Or like if a company's having an appreciation event for their employees and they're saying thank you, they're empowering them as well to say, like, without you, this wouldn't happen. And the employees are like nodding along. Yeah, that's true. Like, it takes a village to run this kind of business. So think of it that way. It doesn't have to be, I am open to the universe sending me more money. I mean, we are, but it doesn't have to be abstract. It can just be like, I got this, I'm going to work on this. And, when those other thought distortions come up, just, basically just, yeah, whack them aside.
Yeah. And one thing that I like doing, even if I don't like verbally say them to themselves, which I've heard that's helpful, I love leaving like post-it notes for myself of either like good quotes that I've heard, affirmations. And one in particular that I wrote like several months ago was just like on a piece of, shocking, painter's tape in my studio, and it's right on my painting shelf. And one of the affirmations is, the most unique thing about you is not your art. The most thing about your art is you. And
Oh,
realizing how integral we are in our creative process. And so I don't know, I just love seeing that every single day. And it's a good check to my mindset if I'm ever getting down on myself or feeling that imposter syndrome, of like, my best work is behind me, like everyone's going to think I'm a fraud, what am I doing here? To be like, no, you are here and your work is valuable because you are the one making it.
mhm.
And
And
again, it's
only you
nothing
can make it.
fancy, it's nothing fancy, it's nothing crazy, it's literally Sharpie on a piece of painter's tape. But it totally shifts the mindset. So implementing even just little things like that can be super helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. Another one is getting external feedback, and we don't mean like shouting from the rooftops of social media type, but more like seeking constructive external feedback. So this is when you're either sharing your work or maybe some of those thoughts that are popping up with your trusted peers, your mentors, maybe if you're part of an art community, so that you can gain fresh perspectives and challenge your own biases. Sometimes we really need to hear it from somebody else. Sometimes the affirmations are not enough, or journaling or something like that. That negative thought or distortion is just stuck on repeat. And we just need to talk it out with somebody else who'll go, that's ridiculous. Like, that's not you. Like, come here, get a hug. Like, you're fine. You're fine. You're going to be okay. So sometimes we really need that, someone to kind of break through that wall. And then the other thing that we've both found really helpful is to, and we talked about this in a previous episode as well, is to cultivate creative rituals. Again, it doesn't have to be woo woo, and we say words like that, but essentially, rituals or routines that can help you get into a focused, positive mindset. So, for example, for some artists, this is playing a specific playlist before they start to work. Essentially as a way to signal the brain it's time to create, right? Other examples are I know plenty of artists, and I'm sure you've seen them on socials too, where like right before they get started, they'll drink their favorite cup of coffee or tea. And that just means it's go time, for their brains. Or maybe they take a short walk, just to kind of get the blood flowing before they get in. Or another easy one is to light a candle, of a scent that you really enjoy. If you're in a shared space, obviously be mindful of the smells with incense and any other aromatics. But essentially, it's kind of like when those thoughts are just kind of like again on repeat, they're bombarding you, then it's really helpful to be like, okay, yeah, whatever, I hear you, but also like, I don't have time for you. I'm gonna light this candle, I'm gonna like play this nice chill hop track that I love, and I'm gonna get to work, because art and inspiration doesn't wait on anybody. Like, you got to do the thing. And a lot of times, like, once you've gotten over that first little hurdle, that first little bump of time, a lot of times you do enter the creative zone, and then some of those other cognitive distortions kind of fade away into the background. It's not ignoring them, it is acknowledging them, but it's also not letting them impede your progress.
Yeah, and I think a big part of that is cultivating that artistic resilience in a way, that mental strength that you really need as a creative and entrepreneur, especially to help build, maintain, and have a fulfilling art career, because it helps keep those cognitive distortions like minimal. And again, you're acknowledging them and not being surprised or shocked when they come up, because inevitably they will, but more so like recognizing that they're there, but also then easily being able to discredit them or combat them with the mental strength that you've built. And one thing that I found is super helpful with that is, especially when it comes to applications, like we were talking about earlier, or any type of rejection really, is shifting it into motivation. So maybe you got rejected from multiple group exhibitions, but instead of giving up, you continue to refine your portfolio, use it as a way to then look at, okay, was I really presenting my best foot forward? How can I improve this application moving forward? And it's that kind of resilience and endurance of the creative process. Like, this is a lifelong career that we're all embarking on. It's not just a 2-3 month sprint and then off to the next thing. So if you're really in it for the long haul of accepting, okay, this is a learning lesson that I had to learn right now, and I'm going to be stronger because of it. And therefore you can improve your application, take better pictures, revisit your artist statement, and then use that for future applications, even though you may have just gotten some tough rejections that stung a little bit, but realizing that that's where you need to be in your process, and that you're not stuck in that zone forever. It's a learning lesson, really
Yeah.
using that as motivation moving forward.
Yeah, that's definitely a good one to help defeat that all or nothing thinking we were discussing earlier. It's like, no, just turn that into a challenge accepted. Oh yeah, I can't get in, challenge accepted. Maybe next year then. And just keep
Yeah.
trying. Like you said, it is for the long haul. Another a bit I found helpful is to use some of these some of these situations that pop up, um, to also like to embrace your artistic evolution. So like give yourself permission, like we've been saying, to acknowledge what some of these thoughts are, and then move past them, move past self-doubt, move past perfectionism, try new things, experiment with other media, invest in your artistic growth. Like any of these things can lead to breakthroughs in your art. But if you just kind of get stuck on, oh, I'm never going to be good enough, or, oh, it's gone, I don't have the magic anymore, like, oh, whatever happened, then you're just going to get stuck. Like, you're never going to evolve in your art, or, well, even mentally, right? You're not going to build on that mental fortitude if you're giving up too easily. So definitely keep going. um Also definitely support, build a support network, which is, this is something we talk about a lot, of course. Reach out, like we said, to fellow artists, mentors, friends, even non-art friends can help with this. They can help encourage you during challenging times. I mean, for example, during the worst parts of the pandemics, if you've listened to our episode, you've heard the story before. Jackie and I would do weekly check-ins for both motivation but also for accountability. So whenever those thoughts would come up, especially the what's the point, world is shut down, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Y'all lived through that. We're not gonna rehash that one. But essentially, like, we could talk to each other and be like, okay, well, there's a lot of things outside of our control, but what is within our control, let's support each other on what these goals are, and hold ourselves accountable and try to cheer ourselves up and like work through it. So definitely
Yeah.
helpful to do that.
Oh, I do miss those Monday night check-in calls. I mean,
The 3-4 hours while we were working and walking and all
literally.
the things. Yeah.
Yeah. Not that I miss the lockdown COVID times by any
Yeah,
means,
absolutely not.
but it was a very like unique phase of the world. I mean, honestly, as everyone
For
knows,
everybody.
but having that Monday check-in truly was so pivotal for both of us. And to where I'd be like, okay, we're gonna like talk on the phone for an hour. 6.5 hours later, like I would just be doing like walking outside, talking to you on the phone, again, getting my miles in, I guess, and be like, okay, Adriana, it's getting dark out. I need to go inside. Anyway, but yeah, definitely having that check-in support is so, so important. And another thing is really looking at it for the long term, because recognizing and overcoming those cognitive distortions like self-doubt and fear really can make you feel stuck. And so instead of focusing on building, instead of like maximizing those distortions, focus on the long term. This isn't a short term, oh, I'm stuck, so therefore I'm going to jump ship and go on to the next shiny object hobby. You're really looking at it long term. You're looking at it from, this is a career and this is just a hurdle that I'm overcoming right now. And seeing the seasons of your creative practice can be really great in terms of keeping perspective of, this one setback is not the end of the world. I'm in it for the long haul. And then knowing that in hindsight, this is something that you kind of need to learn at that phase. But it's really also just important to note that as we wrap up this conversation here, that these mindsets can happen to anyone. And it's really just the awareness and empathy for yourself that can go a long way in overcoming it, and knowing that it does happen to everyone. We're all not unique in those mindsets, but overcoming them is part of the journey and part of that resilience that you build as an artist.
Yeah, tenacity and grit, baby, all the way. The Another thing that comes to mind is, in trying to cultivate a healthy mindset, you can start seeing those challenges that pop up, or those rejections and things that come up, not so much as roadblocks, but as opportunities for growth and evolution. And like we mentioned, like if any of those negative thoughts are stuck on repeat, just reach out to a friend, reach out to a therapist, reach out to another artist. I mean, they can usually help you uncover what those distortions are and move past them. And with that, you get to learn to identify them. There's a passage, we've probably mentioned it before, from Elizabeth Gilbert's book, called Big Magic, that I absolutely adore. I'm paraphrasing here a bit, but basically she talks about, when fear basically gets in the car and you acknowledging it as a passenger and basically saying, you sit in the back. right? Especially as it relates to the creative process. Like, you're acknowledging it. It's sitting in the back. It's part of our brain to help us keep safe, et cetera, et cetera. But it doesn't mean it gets to drive. It doesn't mean it even gets to change the music on the radio. You know what I mean? It's just like, yeah, yeah, yeah. I see you. Thank you for trying to keep me safe. But also, no, you can't. No, you can't control the vehicle that we're in. You get to do that. So I feel like fear and other cognitive distortions, that's exactly what they are. It's important to not ignore them. It's important to identify them. It's important to not beat yourself over the fact you're having them in the first place, but to spend the time to uncover where some of them are coming from, and then just figuring out how to overcome and just get past them. And again, ask for help if you need to. But with that, we're going to go ahead and wrap today's episode. We really hope you enjoyed this conversation.
As always, our blog will be linked in the show notes where you can find episode notes and links to all of our other podcast episodes.
And if you want to stay connected with us in between episodes, share your feedback, or have a question you would like for us to answer on the podcast, you can reach us through social media. I'm at Mayart across all platforms.
And I'm at J Sanders Studio on all platforms. And if you want to follow the podcast, we are at Level Up Artists on Instagram. Thank you so much for listening. We'll talk to you next week.